Today on the Ferment Station, let's talk about modern sanitation versus what our ancestors did.
That's right, we're channeling our ancestors. And we're going to talk about some myths, some legends, and some outright falsehoods.
We are?
We are.
Oh, okay. I'm Brian.
I'm Derica.
Let's get sanitary. That just came to me. So we have a lot of notes here. So if you see me looking down, if you're actually watching this rather than listening, I'm sorry. But a common question we were asked is, why do we sanitize everything when our ancestors or people even hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago still made mead and wine and beer and they didn't sanitize?
Well, this question alone and the way it's proposed is actually quite preposterous and insulting because there are so many things that we do differently now that our ancestors didn't do, and we don't question those things, do we?
Well, we don't want to really go there, but the real thing is they did actually have some understanding of sanitation. I did some research on this to try to find more info, and it was actually very surprising, some of the things that I found out. First thing that I want to say, though, is I have said many times that I believe in the past they dealt with more failures or they made more brews that were not perfect or as good as they wanted them to be because of various reasons, not having the sanitation being one. In other words, like if they were making a mead, they were preserving a food, whether it be fruits, whether it be the honey, whatever, that cost them money or time or whatever to procure. So even if it came out slightly infected and wasn't harmful to them, they're probably still going to consume it. Now, they might sweeten it, they might flavor it, they might cook with it. There's all sorts of things that they could have done, but they would have dealt with a less than perfect beverage, where today a lot of people will just dump those out.
Right. And that's where intent comes into play. A lot of times our intent nowadays, particularly in the hobby of homebrewing, is to make the most flavorful and delightful beverage we possibly can. Right. Where in ye olden days, it was like, this is going to go bad, so let's chuck it in some alcohol and maybe we can still eat it and save from starving. Yeah,
it was a preservation technique. And some of the things that they might have dealt with are a higher contamination risk. Without modern sanitation, there was definitely a higher risk of contamination in all stages of food and drink production, including wine and mead making. That's just a fact. There was. Today, we understand a lot more about germs, bacteria, and all the things that can infect any food stuff that they didn't actually have an understanding of back then.
Sure. We also understand the benefits of simply being clean.
Yeah.
That wasn't quite understood back then.
You'd be surprised how clean they actually were.
Right. And this goes to the subset, which is kind of a weird subset, but the Vikings, which...
They were incredibly clean.
That's a whole different conversation about...
Very hygienic.
What Vikings are or aren't. But... that group of people were very hygienic, more so than some of their other areas at the same time period. Yeah.
Some of the things that would have been in older brews that we may not have today would be like unwanted microbes. Bacteria, wild yeast, though not necessarily harmful, are not really a desirable thing in fermentation, and they could easily find their way into a must, be it grape or honey wine or whatever, leading to off flavors. Now, that's what I was talking about. They probably drank things that didn't taste as good as what we make today. Now, I don't think that happened every time, but I'm betting it happened often enough that it was a thing that they got adjusted to. And there's more on that in a minute. But they also had a limited knowledge of yeast. Limited knowledge of understanding yeast strains and their effects on fermentation existed. Reliance on wild yeast led to inconsistent results.
We've talked about it before on City Steading Brews, where there was the concept of the magic stick.
Yep.
And that was a wooden stick that they used in all their fermentation. And what they didn't understand was that it was pre-inoculated with yeast.
Yep.
So therefore, it would transfer a live active yeast strain to the next brew, thus continuing the fermentation. They just decided, because they didn't understand what it was, that it was magic.
Right. And I mean, it's understandable because they didn't have microscopes and things like that. They didn't realize that there were things smaller than we could see. I mean, how would you possibly think that if you couldn't actually see them? But they understood that when I used this stick, it made the bubbles and made alcohol. They got that much. And I'm simplifying it a lot. I mean, the thing is, we, meaning people today, seem to think that we are the smartest people that ever existed. What we forget is that human brains have not actually changed in a long, long time. Our ancestors were just as intelligent as we are today.
Yeah.
They just didn't have as much knowledge as we have today, but they had knowledge about things that we have forgotten today as well. So
Absolutely.
There's a lot more to this whole thing than just the simple ideas.
And if we look at all the ancient civilizations, there was a ridiculous amount of knowledge that was lost to us.
Yeah.
That there are some techniques that were utilized back in
That
the
we still
olden
don't know
days
how they did it.
that we can't even comprehend now. So
And the average person knew how to do so many things that we are just not taught today. I mean, home ec really should be a thing in
totally
schools.
should.
And it's just not.
That leads me to the YouTube channel that does the historic reenactments of castle living, and they go into the.
Oh,
do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the one that I was watching for a while. Yeah.
Right. And it is fantastic because they show the different chores and the different roles that each person took on, and the vast wealth of knowledge and understanding of their natural environment and how to utilize different things in different ways that we don't even really take into consideration right now. And
And that was like just common knowledge taken for granted.
Yeah.
And this is the funny thing about like wine, mead, and even some of this common knowledge is that the reason it was not really written down is because it was considered such mundane, everyday knowledge that they never thought it would go out of style.
Yeah.
So no one wrote it down because it was just a thing you know how to do.
Of course you know how to make beer because everybody makes beer. Of course you know how to make bread because everybody makes bread.
So these things got, some of the techniques and recipes and things got lost to time because it just was so ubiquitous that everybody knew how to do it. So why write it down? Plus, you have to realize that literacy is relatively new. People weren't really all literate for a very long time. Some other things, though, that they didn't understand was temperature control. And the fermentation process is somewhat temperature sensitive. I mean, it's very temperature sensitive. So without accurate temperature control, the process could be erratic, which could affect the final flavor. And we've seen it ourselves. If the temperature gets really hot, that can affect fusels and other products being produced. And if it gets too cold, well, it could stress, or it could throw off flavors, or it could even stall.
Also, I believe temperatures that could be really cold, particularly our northern Norse friends, may have a limited risk of bad things occurring simply because it was so cold.
That's true. Yeah, I never really thought about it that way. Yeah, the warmer temperature would have a higher risk of contamination from any kind of an infection, whereas a colder temperature might, just by way of being colder, knock some of those out. That's interesting. Yeah. Because there'd be less wow. See, you know, even just seeing the facts and reading about them and thinking about it, you actually come up with even more stuff. They also made these things for preservation. We kind of touched on this earlier. And some of the methods that they used spices that have antimicrobial properties, and that could have also affected the final taste. So they may have used it at first to mask bad flavors, but they could have possibly been adding these things eventually because they realized it lasted longer when they did. So like cinnamon, for example, just the first thing that came to mind, has antimicrobial properties in it. So if they had a mead that didn't taste very good and they happened to have cinnamon, don't ask me how they got it. I don't know. That's not what this is about. They put cinnamon in it and it immediately started to taste a little bit better. It covered up some of those funky flavors that maybe came from an infection or something like that. But they also noticed that maybe it lasted, it was preserved, so they could keep it through another season. Anytime they could make something taste better and not spoil, that's a good thing. So they would have kept doing it. And over time, they learned that that's why they were doing it. But it started out probably something very innocently like, oh, let me just make this taste better. I like this stick that says spicy. Let me put it in my mead that tastes like crap right now.
If we look back historically of where the great civilizations of the past were, it's far beyond just our friends to the north. We're talking about Egypt. We're talking about the great Roman Empire, right?
And the Chinese.
Chinese,
Indian,
African, all of that region that are going to have easily accessible to these spices that we're referring to.
That's true.
Also had honey. They also had fruit and grapes.
Yeah, everybody thinks of mead as a Norse thing. It's actually, I think the Norse adopted it from somewhere else. I don't believe that it was started there.
I'm going to say that the word mead is
Norse
Norse origin, but
honey wine.
We have noticed in our research that basically every civilization that had access to honey, which is basically
even North American,
worldwide,
Native Americans,
had a sort of fermented honey beverage.
Yep, that's true. That's true. Something else that's very interesting that I had not really thought about, and that is preferences. When we describe something today, it's based on our modern ideas of what is good, bad, or acceptable. They may have had so much what we call infection today that it was normal to taste that way, and they could have actually adapted their taste buds to appreciate that as a good flavor.
Right.
That, to me, is crazy, but if you think about it, people used to like garum. I mean, have you ever smelled rotting fish guts before? That's basically what garum was made from. And they put it on everything.
Yes.
Because they thought it made it taste better.
Now, as Brian is alluding, a better or something more flavorful or perceived
strongly
as
flavored.
good is widely different from person to person, even nowadays.
Sure.
So back then, and we were only speculating because we don't have our TARDIS, by golly, they may have thought that, oh, this really strong flavor is something that I'm striving to get.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't understand how they got it, and that's fine. After time of replicating it, they may go, oh, put this in there and this in there, and then you get this flavor.
Right.
And so they might strive for that. And our palates today might not enjoy that flavor, where then they found it, I can drink this, it has a strong flavor, and I don't get sick. That means it's good.
Yep, pretty much. Now, you got to remember, too, we're using today very, specifically made and scientifically tested yeast strains and things like that fall within a pretty narrow version of what they can do. Like they have specific properties, and that they pretty much stick to those. Whereas back in the day, even as little as a couple hundred years ago, they were mostly using wild yeast, which varied wildly in what they can and cannot do. Now, if you get your honey from the same area season after season, you might get wild yeast that are similar, but I still don't think they would be exactly the same strain, because different ecosystems, different microcosms, they are evolving differently. And yeast have a pretty quick life cycle. They don't last months. They last hours or days before they're taken over by the next generation. So there's going to be changes from week to week, let alone from season to season. But in the same area with the same plants for the bees to harvest from, same weather conditions, you might see something that's more similar and probably even repeatable or consistent. Like from season to season, they might know just from doing it so long and knowledge being passed down that get it from this area and the honey will do this. So they might have those ideas in mind too. And that's going to be an improvement in making their process. It's selective breeding. That's exactly what they're doing.
Also, I think there is a misnomer in the ancient civilizations that they were very insular. And we have seen a multitude of evidence showing that there were massive trade routes throughout history.
That's true.
And so they were trading ingredients, they were trading recipes, they were trading final products. So all of these things, just because, oh, that doesn't grow there, doesn't necessarily mean they weren't utilizing it. They still had access to it. Even the Vikings, if you think about it, they were sailing great distances and being quite effective at going to a new place and taking what they wanted and bringing it back home.
Yep. And thus changing their culture and expanding. And they also left bits of their culture behind in other places too. Getting back to sanitation though. Ancient civilizations actually employed a lot of different ways for sanitation. Maybe different than what we do today, but they actually had quite a few examples. And just some examples of that are sulfur dioxide. Now, I'm reading off of this. It's a common modern preservative. It was used in ancient China and Greece, but not for the reason you think. It was to drive out evil spirits. Now, this is where a little bit of beliefs and science start to kind of cross the lines in religion versus the unknown versus the supernatural versus the real and science. So to them, maybe evil spirits made it taste bad or spoil. So they used a preservative to keep the evil spirits out. What they didn't realize is they were pretty darn close to being accurately right. I mean, maybe they're not evil spirits, but bacteria could ruin whatever it was that was in there. So a preservative kills those. It's just that crossover. And this is the kind of stuff that I love that's fascinating. It was also believed to prevent the vinegar smell of spoiled wine. Now, you all know that vinegar is just spoiled wine. It's literally just wine that has gone bad. But it's usually caused by acetobacters, which are just like yeast. They're in everything. And you activate an acetobacter by giving it alcohol and oxygen. That's why we always say don't mix things or oxidize things once there's alcohol present, because you're just asking for it to make vinegar. Now, there's a few things that the ancients did that aren't necessarily so good for making good stuff or
Are we talking about the fall of Rome, Brian?
Well, no, not exactly. I mean, I would not say that bad wine was the fall of Rome. I think that was lots of other reasons. But one of the things that they did was they used lead. So they would use like leaded vessels to store wine in, and they also boiled grape juice in leaded vessels to make a syrup. It was called sapa. And it sweetened and preserved the wine at the same time. But it also introduced lead into the wine, which obviously has... less
negative effects.
That's a good way to put it. It'll kill you, okay? It's toxic to the body. They also used resins and other additives. This is a new one to me. I've not heard of it used this way. Some ancient winemakers used resin, which made the wine sticky and thick as a preservative. Now, I've heard of putting resin on the inside of the amphillae, which is the old Roman-style jugs. And they did that as a weatherproofing so that the wine didn't soak into the clay as much, or so that it was easier to clean, because the resin would make like a hard coating. So I always understood it as like almost a ceramic coating on the inside, but they're saying something different. They said they also incorporated other ingredients like lye ash, which we all know that that's really good for you, right? Marble dust, because, have a little rock with your wine. Salt, pepper, and various herbs to alter the taste and potentially improve preservation. The efficacy was often questionable.
Now, some of these products, as questionable and as odd as they seem to us, I could see some applications that might be appropriate.
Marble dust?
For example, the marble dust may act as a clarifying agent and bind with things and settle out.
I think the lye ash would do that more.
The lye ash typically would be used at great effect to making soap. I don't really think I'd want to add it to something I wanted to consume.
I definitely wouldn't. Salt and pepper wouldn't be so bad. We've used both.
Pepper and and salt.
And herbs, things like that. So I think a lot of it was some experimentation, some, I know a guy who did this and it worked for him, so people did it. And also they may have seen some slight improvement in the taste, not realizing that they just masked a bad flavor rather than actually improved the quality of the wine itself. And I think there's always going to be that fine line of, did I make the wine better, or did I just mask all the crap that I didn't want to taste in the first place?
All of our practices and understanding of the world today came from our ancestors and their trials and tribulations and tests that went right or went very wrong.
And there's still a lot of myths and a lot of weird ideas as a result of all of that too, which we're going to talk about a couple of those coming up. Open air aging. This is one that I know some places still do open air fermenting, but I don't know about open air aging. What they would do is they would encourage the wine to be kept, like in large vats, open to the elements, open to the air. It increased the risk of bacterial infection, but also potentially led to oxidation that altered the wine's characteristics.
So basically, they were making sherry.
Yeah, this might be like the forerunner to sherries and things like that. Still, I don't know. That's kind of extreme. I don't know that I'd do open. It just sounds like a bad idea to me. And I don't know the time period that this occurred. I just know that it did. Diluting with water. This was actually a very popular thing that was done. And I thought it was done mostly to stretch the wine, making it last longer. In other words, like a bottle of wine was considered like a concentrate. And they would stretch that into 3, 4, 5 bottles by adding water to their glass. So that way that one bottle of wine might be enough for 4 or 5 people rather than like you get 3 glasses out of a bottle.
Sure.
But they also believed, and this is the part that was new to me, that they could purify stagnant or less than perfect water by adding the wine to it. It also lowered the alcohol content, and it may have improved palatability for something that was like maybe off. Like if they had something that had an infection, diluting it is going to make it taste a little bit less off, if you will.
Well, if you think about it today, if you go to a restaurant and their tap water isn't all that exciting,
add lemon to it.
They will offer you gratefully a slice of lemon to take care of that flavor.
That's true. So I guess they'd be, instead of a slice of lemon, they'd
splash of wine.
A splash of wine into your glass of water to make that crappy water taste like crappy wine. Which is just a weird concept to me, but I kind of get it. But I always thought that they did it just to make it last longer and to be able to drink more without getting drunk. Because there were time periods and areas where being drunk in any social situation was considered
very
bad
faux pas.
form. It was really not a good idea.
Yeah.
And then we're on to things that they added. Again, for sanitation and to cover things up. And that's spices and sweeteners. Spices and sweeteners like honey were added to wine to enhance flavor and potentially preserve it by creating a less hospitable environment for microorganisms. Now, honey specifically would have been a great addition for that because they even used it as late as World War II to cure infections on wounds.
Wound treatment, yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. I just wonder how much you'd have to add because the second you start to dilute honey, it loses that effectiveness.
Sure. But if you add that along with some of the antimicrobial spices.
You might weaken the microbes enough. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. But then again, we don't know how sweet they liked things either.
Sure.
Without knowing that too much sugar could be not a good thing for you, if you had access to sugar, you might use more than we would today.
Right.
I would imagine. If you had access to it. Now, it's expensive too back then, so they might not have used as much as we think.
And
so
certain classes might use more on purpose just to show their wealth.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. I found an interesting story here. Marcus Porcius Cato, a.k.a. Cato the Elder. You might have even heard that name. He lived from 234 to 149 BC. So we're talking literally...
Can you repeat those numbers again?
234 to 149 BC. So we're literally talking 21 to 2200 years ago. He was a Roman statesman and early advocate for hygiene in winemaking, recommending, for example, that wine jars be wiped clean twice a day with a new broom every time. Now think about that for just a second. He's saying wipe them every day with a new broom, which means he knew something was happening that was getting into the broom, and the next time it was used, it was contaminating the next batch. He also believed in thoroughly sealing the jars after fermentation to prevent the wine from spoiling and turning into vinegar, which means he had a rudimentary understanding that oxygen added to a finished fermentation was causing vinegar to occur. This is where the start of all these things happen, and this is what's fascinating to me. 2,100 years ago, he figured this out. Also, he believed in not filling the amphoras to the top, but leaving some headspace to allow a degree of oxidation. We call that micro-oxidation today. It's not something that we generally do, but it happens quite often, even without us wanting to. Anytime you have a little bit of headspace, a certain amount does happen. It usually is a nice thing, and it helps with the mellowing and aging process to make things taste really nice. But this is the kicker. Cato's manual, he actually wrote one of the first manuals on winemaking and preservation, was fervently followed, becoming the standard textbook of Roman winemaking for centuries. I just love seeing stuff like that. Here we are 2,100 years ago. They were understanding the rudimentary fundamentals of how to store and keep your wine.
Yeah, and it's surprising to me how quickly people dismiss the ancient knowledge and that, oh, they certainly didn't know what they were talking about. And it's like all the roots of our knowledge today came from them. So why would you dismiss them so quickly? And they had, particularly in Rome, they had massive resources. They had cork, they had clay vessels, they had ways of waterproofing those vessels, they had indoor irrigation. I mean, they had a lot of stuff going on for them that would make this a viable sanitary situation. And when we have great philosophers that are thinking about these processes and what is going on behind the scenes that they may or may not understand, and then have the time and the means to research it further,
Yeah.
it's not surprising that they actually got some things right.
It's just really interesting that they got things right, but for the wrong reasons a lot of time. Like they thought they were getting rid of evil spirits, maybe not Cato the Elder, but they thought they were getting rid of evil spirits. Well,
they weren't getting rid of evil
bacteria,
spirits.
You know? So they sort of got things right. And it was mostly due to observation. They would observe that this went wrong. What happened to make that go wrong? What was different from the one next to it? Oh, that one has a leaky seal. This one doesn't. There you go. Must be air got to it. Boom. And they just formed a theory. They test that theory over several uses of the things and find out that, hey, that proved to be true. So now that becomes a way that they do things. Some other stuff that I wanted to talk about, though, and these are always things that I hear about this all the time, so I want to bring it up, and that is bad water. There is an idea and a story and a theory circulating around that all water was poisonous and bad and polluted, and people drank wine and beer all the time because they could never get good water. I'm going to tell you right now, that is a myth. It is a fabrication 100, well, maybe not 100%, but close. People most certainly had access to clean water. If they didn't, we would not have survived. That is a fact. You cannot drink beer and wine 24/7 and live very long, okay? But there is some truth to water being polluted, mostly in the bigger cities. And we're talking going back to like Middle Ages, medieval times, and even before then. They had a lack of sanitation and a general lack of understanding of pathogens, bacteria, and things like that. Also, airborne illnesses and waterborne illnesses were kind of just a thing you dealt with. They didn't understand where it came from, but they just knew that people get sick, and they didn't really understand why. They had various treatments. I'm not even going to get into that. Some of them were good, some of them weren't so good, but they had various ways of dealing with it, and that was just a thing they dealt with until there was understanding that some amount of sanitation was important for the water. Now, I do not believe most beer was made using polluted water because people aren't stupid.
We also have to think about where beer was made. Beer was typically made in the home by the woman of the house.
Yep.
And if she wasn't in a overpopulated metropolitan area, then she got it from the fresh spring or the well, which was not polluted water.
Right.
And then she got fresh grains to utilize to create her beer or her.
They used what they had.
Right.
But I would think that they would probably choose better ingredients than crappy ingredients if given the choice.
And then if you think about the most popular brewers, the most infamous, respected brewers.
You mean famous. Infamous means bad.
Famous. Okay, fine. The ones you think of.
Sure.
Were monks.
Right.
Was their water resource polluted? I don't think so, because they
not.
tended to be isolated from other communities.
Right.
And so they had great stuff to work with. And so their stuff was of quality and probably what got their reputation in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And consistency is a big thing. So they would have used consistently good quality ingredients because, I mean, that's just common sense. And that's why I say, like, people aren't stupid. They would know bad water made into beer is going to make bad beer. Good water made into beer is going to make better beer. But anyway, the bad water concept actually is a 19th century invention. I don't really know what the facts are that made people think that, but people did drink a lot of beer. They did drink a lot of wine, but mostly it was not for the reasons of bad water. It was because beer, for instance, was basically food, liquid food. I mean, you could pour somebody a beer from that time period and gave them a lot of nutrients and energy to be able to work throughout the day. Wine was much the same, not quite as good that way. But
breakfast beer was a thing.
Yeah, breakfast beer was a real thing. I mean, even children were drinking beer. Now, when I say beer, we're talking the second runnings or even third runnings beer a lot of the time.
Also known as small beer.
Yeah, it might only be 1% or 2% alcohol by the time they're drinking it. So they could drink a significant amount of it. It quenched their thirst. It kept them cooler. It kept them hydrated, which is
also carbohydrate rich.
Oh, yeah.
Therefore giving them lots of energy to work throughout the day.
And that's the main reason why people drank a lot of beer. And the wine, much like the Romans, they actually diluted the wine up until fairly recently. Only the last couple hundred years, I think we stopped diluting wine and started drinking it stronger. I'm not sure why exactly, maybe just to save some time. I don't know. but they would dilute the wine and that way it carried longer. Also, on to the next myth that just kind of bugs me. This comes up a lot. It's not really about brewing, but the average life expectancy thing of ancient cultures. This just drives me nuts. I hear this all the time.
It's a nomenclature thing.
Yes. It's a numbers thing. Like people say, oh, the average life expectancy was only like 30. So, you're an old man if you were 35. That's not actually true, okay? Because you have to remember what average means. Average does not mean mean. Average means the sum of all divided by how many.
Yeah. Everything that was born and everything that died.
So if you have one person that lived to 1 and one person that lived to 100, the average is 50. Well, it's actually 50.5. That doesn't mean that everybody lived to be 50.5 years old. It means that one person lived to be 1 person lived to be 100. Just for example, I actually looked this up just that I had the facts. In ancient Rome, the average life expectancy was 25 to 35 years old. Now you might be saying, wow, that's really low. Yes, it is. The rate of infant mortality was very high. That means number of people that lived to become adults was very low. 25% of babies in the 1st century AD did not survive their first year, and up to 50% of all children would die before the age of 10. So that means half the people never made it to 10 years old. They brought the average down quite a bit because... Oh, actually, here's an interesting fact. As a result of this, the Roman state gave legal rewards to women who had successfully given birth. They actually promoted the idea of people giving birth because they wanted to keep the population growing. But with decent medical care, people still lived into their 60s and 70s, even 2,000 years ago. And when I say decent medical care, I mean they weren't just left out to die. They took care of things. They still had medical practices. Maybe they weren't as good as we have today, but they still did it. But here's a really interesting fact. According to the World History Encyclopedia, in Roman times, a man was considered getting to his older years when he reached 60 years old, and a woman at 50, which means most people did not die between 25 and 35 years old. Most people died before they were 10. Those that made it past 10 usually lived very long lives. And if you think about it, if half the people lived to be 10 and half the people lived to be 70, that's 40 is the average, which is a little higher than what they're saying here, but that gives you an idea. So it might be like 70 and 10, but whatever, you get the idea. So whenever people say, oh, but nobody lived past 35,
it's that average
drives
word.
Me nuts.
Whenever you see average, you got to question what's actually going on.
Right. And that's all I had notes for. But on the sanitary thing again, we talk about this a lot. And my view on sanitation is do the best you can with what you have. I know people that take it really, really far and they basically turn their house or their brewing area into a clean room. They're wearing masks and they got the white suits on. And if that makes you happy and you feel confident in doing that, then that is how you should do it. I know other people that, I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, they go out in their backyard, they grab a jug that's been sitting there for 2 months and all the elements, whatever, come inside, pour in some honey that they just scraped off of a tree in the backyard, and they let that ferment, and they say they have no problems. I might be exaggerating just a little bit, but both extremes are fine if it works for you. And when I say works for you, means you have an acceptable amount of good quality brew that you like and no one's getting sick from it. How's that for a low standard?
Sure. And to those diehards that say, well, it's good enough for my ancestors, it's good enough for me. Do you share that opinion when it comes to medical practices?
Right. The other side to that too, what's interesting is we today are much more susceptible to disease than our ancestors were. They could consume things that would make us very ill with no ill effect because their immune systems were vastly more superpowered than ours are today.
Because they had to be.
Yeah. Well, because we have so many preservatives today. We have so many medications that get rid of, and like antibiotics and things like that. They didn't have those things. So their immune systems were much, much stronger. I mean, even think about it, like your average dog has a much better immune system than the average human does. And that's because in the wild, dogs would be eating things that would make humans sick, rotting flesh and things like that, that they they can get away with, we can't. So that's where a lot of that comes from.
So I hope you've enjoyed this historical review of sanitation practices. If there's some other historical thing that you're really interested in that incorporates a brewing, let us know in the comments below.
I like how you had to add the caveat that incorporates brewing. But anyway, as always, guys, thanks so much for listening and have a great day.
Bye-bye.